Today we're making a Swabian specialty called Maultaschen. You could say it's the southern German version of a ravioli. Historically eaten around Easter during Lent, these filled pasta pockets were supposedly invented by a group of monks in the monastery of Maulbronn, which is where the name seems to originate. Locally they're often called Herrgottspreiseli. It loosely translates to God cheaters. The monks made a filling that included meat, which of course is prohibited during Lent. But since it's in the pocket, supposedly God couldn't see them cheating. I don't have to cheat. I'll simply make two versions of this, a vegetarian one and one with the traditional meat filling. A little bit of prep first. I'm going to blanch some spinach and chop it up. We need that for the fillings later. A little bit of salt, a handful of spinach, and boiling water. And here's some ice cold water to stop the cooking process, and that will also retain the nice green color. Just fish out your spinach and dump it into the ice water. Let's pull the spinach out and squeeze out as much water as we can. You could use a kitchen towel for this. I'm just squeezing as hard as I can. Let's quickly chop this up and set it aside for later. You want a fairly fine chop because it's going to be a filling. Of course, if you want to skip a step, use the frozen plain spinach. That's already chopped for you. I've already prepared all the other ingredients, so let's get started on the dough. Since I own a stand mixer, I'm using that to mix the dough. Mixing it by hand is just a little more work. This is a simple egg pasta dough. If you don't want to use eggs, a regular pasta dough without eggs will do just fine. Both versions can be found in old recipes, since people didn't always have eggs. I'm just adding my flour, recipe in the description, salt, and eggs. And now we just mix. Start slow, you don't want to make a mess, and then once it starts to come together, you can go quicker. The eggs may not be enough liquid, so just add a little bit of water as needed. I want my dough extra pliable, which is why I'm adding a little bit of fat. I'm using a tablespoon of butter at room temperature, but of course you could use any kind of neutral oil. Push down the flour every now and then until everything is incorporated. Okay, I think this is it. It's not very sticky, so that's good. Now throw a little bit of flour on your surface. And now I knead it by hand for a little bit until it's nice and smooth. I'll put it back into the bowl and let it rest for like half an hour. Before we start with the fillings, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss another recipe. Thank you. While the dough rests, let's make the fillings. Here's the vegetarian filling. I made a mushroom duxelle earlier as a meat replacement because mushrooms have a lot of umami and you want that in the filling. Further, there's going to be spinach and goat cheese. Let's mash up the cheese, add the duxelle. Okay, once these two are combined, add the spinach, a few onions, and the egg. I'm just using an egg yolk here. You could use the whole egg, but that might be too much liquid. Now I'm just adding a few of the oats and see how the consistency is afterwards. This is actually salty enough. I'm not going to add any more seasoning to this. The duxelle and the goat cheese are pretty salty to begin with. That's the vegetarian filling. Traditionally, the meat filling is made with bratwurst. Problem is, imported German bratwurst has to be fully cooked and therefore is unsuitable. So you'd either have to use a domestic bratwurst, which might not taste the same, or you just make your own from ground pork and bratwurst spices. I'm going to go down that route, but of course you can replace it with regular ground meat that you spice up, or you can replace it with Italian sausage if you like that. That's readily available in any supermarket. You don't have to make them the traditional way, you have to make them so you like them. I mixed the bratwurst spice mix from my bratwurst recipe, and I'm using some ground pork. I just toss that into a food processor and mix it together. There, Bratwurst. I'll continue to use the food processor because it's already dirty and convenient. Just don't over-process the filling. You want some chunks in there because you want some texture. I'm adding some spinach, some ground beef, parsley chopped, onions chopped, an egg yolk. We are going all in on meat here, but meat was very expensive back in the day. A lot of the recipes actually stretch the meat with an old rehydrated bun, as I'm using, stale bread, breadcrumbs, even oats. Anything to bulk up that mixture so you can cut down on the meat. And now I just process this carefully into a nice homogeneous mass. Pulsing it will give you more control. And there is the meat filling. It already looks awesome. Let's quickly sample for seasoning. A small amount won't kill you. This needs salt. There. And I might just add a little bit of pepper while we're at it. If you want, you could grind some nutmeg into this. This would be very traditional, but I think I'm going to skip nutmeg this time. This is our meat filling. Refrigerate until we need it. The dough has rested. You need to roll this out thin. I'm just going to do it by hand because that's probably what most of you are going to do. I'm using half the dough here for starts. Add a little flour to your surface. You want about 1/8 of an inch thin or even thinner. This dough developed a good amount of gluten. You can see that by the way it pulls back together. If that happens to you, just let it rest a few more minutes and it will relax again. So I just put this aside and use the other half. Put it aside, go back to the first one. I'm just going to treat this like a pizza dough. The classic shape would be rectangular or square, usually because that's the easiest to make. But of course you can make these things in pretty much any shape you want. They have to be fairly large though. So think about 3 inches, 4 inches in diameter and you're good to go. I'm going for strips. Now you need some glue to glue these together. The good glue, of course, is egg and you want that whisk. Eggs are gloopy and they do not really lend themselves well to being brushed onto something. So what I do, I use a cocktail shaker. Pop in a couple eggs and then I just shake. There. Now, brushing this is a breeze. I'm going to do the meat ones first. You want a generous amount, but not too much. About a tablespoon's worth. You place that on the one side. Now you brush a little bit of your egg around the rim. There. And then you just fold this over. Push out as much air as you can. And then you use a fork and you crimp it around the edges. There. This is what it looks like. And now we're going to do this with all the other ones. For the vegetarian ones, I'm going to make round ones, simply so I can distinguish them later. Now this time I'm going to avoid the mess and work on a plate. Again, push out as much air as you can so that there's only filling. Then just crimp the edges. And there you have a round vegetarian one. Once you shaped all your Maultaschen, you just need to cook them in either salted water or better in broth. They're usually served 2 ways. Either pan roasted with some kind of side like a potato salad or something, or more commonly they're served in a broth as a soup. Therefore, cooking them in a broth makes more sense. These are technically dumplings. I have a regular bouillon cube broth here, barely simmering as you can see. And I'm just going to submerge these and wait until they float up, give them an extra 2 minutes and pull them out. There. They're starting to float up. Just carefully push them around a little bit to make sure they do not stick to the bottom, like with any other dumpling. Once they float up, and you gave them an extra 2 minutes or so, you just extract them. And while they may not look like much, they're excellent. Once they're cooked, they will last a few days in the fridge and they freeze really well.